Okay, welcome to an evening of metaphysical speculation. I've just arranged this with Lenny Thyme, so I'm waiting for him to come into the live studio. Shouldn't take him long. But in the meantime, we could talk about something, some conceptual thing. Let me come up with a conceptual thing to talk about. All right, here's Lenny now. All right, so he should.
Howdy.
All right, Lenny.
Okay, for some reason it's not picking up my camera. Let me switch cameras.
All right, let me see if I can get you on now. Yeah, there you go. I can see you now.
Yeah, I have figured out how to hit enough buttons to get these things working.
Cool. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, Rumble Studio's easy when you do it on the phone, but if you try and do it on the phone and the laptop, it confused me completely. Which it shouldn't, but it did. It should be perfectly straightforward, but it isn't for some reason.
My phone and my laptop are now 7 minutes apart. For a
Right.
while it was 3 minutes apart and it just stayed there. And now they're 7 minutes apart. So I think they're in different timelines and they don't communicate with each other very well at all.
All right. Yeah, it's a it's a thing. It's definitely a thing. So, did you have anything you wanted to talk about, Lenny, or is this can I just make something up?
I don't know. You want to ask Lizzie if she wants to join us?
Oh, let me Lizzie. Where do I find Lizzie? Lizzie's on Podbean or Skype, isn't she? So let me try.
Yeah, she's a Skyper, which Skype isn't going to be around too much longer.
Yeah, I know we're gonna have to figure out a way to stay in touch.
Maybe get her
I
on
just
Telegram.
Yeah, that would be the other way to do it. Or just Discord. Invite her to the new way.
I could do that.
See where she is. Got so much spam on this. Unreal. Lots and lots of spam. Random people wanting to talk to me with nothing to say.
Yep. And no followers, nobody that's a connection. And 90% of the people have female names and pretty pictures. So I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure it's bots. And they send us these bots so we don't notice that we're shadow banned. And that way it looks like there's people trying to get attention to us, but it's all bots. They want everybody in their own little box. And you have to actually work to get yourself out there, as you found out, and I've found out, and people who are out there found out. Once you get out there and say stuff, then it's up to people to find you, not for you to find people. But that model is breaking down badly. And so I want to figure out how to produce good quality content that makes people think, but I
yeah, all
don't
right.
know that people think at all. Most people I hang out with think because I think they think because I think. But
No,
that I
I've
think,
deliberately.
therefore I am Descartes quote doesn't make sense.
Oh yeah, he was in trouble. He was about to be executed, I think, when they the king told him to write something important, so he wrote that. But he was about to be executed, so it didn't have to make sense. It just had to make sense to the king.
Hmm.
I think that's how that worked. But
It's nice to be king.
yeah, well, it's a good thing. Yeah, we're all king of our own little fiefdom.
Yep. And we're not the Pope, so we're not dead.
Yeah, that's something we could talk about for a few minutes.
I
It's
think that
very
he
old,
died a long time ago.
right?
Not
Okay.
a very long time ago, but not
When he
on
went
Easter
out there.
Sunday.
Yeah, well,
Well,
he has he was seen in between, but I think he was full of drugs. They've been because they've been keeping him alive to get him to Easter, or he's been trying to stay alive till Easter.
I don't know. I think they packed him in a freezer and left his body there and put a rubber mask on some other person, trotted him out every so often to make it seem like he was alive.
Right, right. That's possible. It's been done before.
Well, I think a lot of people who are presented to us by the media are not really who they are, and that there's a lot of intrigue in the world that we as plebes are not privy to. But I don't believe for a minute that anything they tell us on the idiot box is true in a general sense. It's true in a micro sense because everybody can make truth, but by living your own truth, it cements your personal timeline within the global timeline. And working on a global stage as an individual is really impossible. You can't do it. The people who do work on that global stage are avatars of real people, like that Musk fellow.
Yeah, well, I think the people with the real power in the Vatican was the, the conclave of cardinals or whatever it is. It's the
The
council of
ones that are
cardinals.
meeting to choose the next pope, yes.
Yeah, they're the people with the real power. But according to my mother, he's rigged it so he's pulled in new people from outside to be part of the vote, so that they don't just stick with the old blood, if you like. He's bringing in some lay people to pick the new pope as well. I don't know whether that's true or not. My mother told me that, so you might have seen it on the BBC or somewhere.
Yeah, I think from our individual perspective, we have no idea what is true on a global scale. I think that what we learned in school might have a hint of truth, but even then, unless you applied yourself in a specific area, what you know is conditional on what people have allowed you to see.
Yeah,
It might be a little different in philosophy, but in chemistry, I can take chemistry and I don't need an outside explanation of things. But if I do, I know who I can talk to who knows what's going on. And so I like to round up resident experts in all fields and see if what they say makes sense to me in terms of the chemistry that I have a feel for. And if there's an analog, a similarity, a pattern, I'll believe what they're saying. If there's
yeah,
not, I will nod and say, yeah, yeah, but not necessarily buy into the whole approach.
yeah.
Chemistry is a, go
We've got a
ahead.
conversation going at the moment where one of the senior guys in the philosophy society said he throws out ideas all the time that are off the wall. they're always off the wall, but I like it because it gives me something to think about. And he came up with this idea that concepts have a life of their own. They defend themselves. They've got a survival instinct. So he's like anthropomorphizing the idea of an idea, which I
That
thought was
makes
interesting.
sense.
Yeah, and it's also it's roughly the equivalent of an egregore in the magical tradition. So in the magical tradition, a thought form would have a life of its own once it leaves the magician that creates it or the ritual that creates it.
What if everything at every scale has life and that consciousness pervades, but at different rates for different senses of scale, so that it's like an old house. If you leave it abandoned, it falls apart. But if there's a family living in a house, it has a vibrancy that comes from the decor. So I think that things that are ignored, neglected, fall apart quickly because their life force is insulted. But I
Yeah,
also think that life force is not exactly what they tell us it is. Consciousness occurs in everything, but it occurs at different rates, and we're only attuned to the frequencies. Well, here on Earth, we're attuned to certain human frequencies, but I think everything in the world at all scales gets normalized to human consciousness so
right.
that everything thinks it's human in the same way, but what that means depends on what it is and what the scale is in that.
Yeah, I used to talk to a dog. A friend of mine has a Jack Russell, and the dog used to belong to somebody who died. And then when his owner died, you could see that he was grieving. You could see that he was in trauma, that he'd lost the main person in his life. And I did some conversations with him in the corner and some Reiki on him, and he responded. But I was talking to him like he was human. I just assumed, right, there's a consciousness in there. It can understand what I'm saying. If I was talking to a person that was grieving, I would say the same thing. And the dog literally responded almost immediately as soon as I started talking to him like a human. It was like being bang. That's the way he wants to be spoken to. That's respecting his consciousness. And if I just talk to him like he was a dog, he would probably have bitten me or run away or something because he wasn't in the mood for taking any prisoners. He wasn't suffering fools at that particular point. He wasn't even going near people because he didn't trust people because somebody had just died. But given 2 or 3 weeks of this new guy looking after him properly and me talking to him in the corner, he he's come around. It took him a while, but he's come around and he goes up to people now, and you can see he's back to being enthusiastic about life again. He's wagging his tail and jumping up and down and sniffing around and looking for things to do rather than just sitting in the corner and moping.
Yeah, the last time I had to disappear because of circumstances, which I have had happen numerous times, you feel the pressure and it's time to go, and you go because
Yeah,
otherwise, I left a cat behind that I was really attached to. And telepathically, I attempted to communicate with the cat over time. And it's hard to know if I succeeded or not, but I felt that was the only thing that I really regretted in leaving without a trace, was that I would have rather taken there were two cats actually, but the one I had way more attachment to than the other. So now again, I have two cats, and I really do believe that what they do is they hold a resonance
Yeah,
outside of human perspective that ties in with our resonance and broadens our ability to create in within that bonding sense.
yeah,
There's a lot of bonding that goes on between humans, both ionic and covalent, and part of my sociochemistry is trying to define the covalent bonds like the one we have, where we talk frequently and produce media and do things like that, as opposed to ionic bonds, where it's people who are forced together from maybe opposite polarities,
right.
interact, and then leave. And the value of the interaction is not near as deep as the covalent bonds, but the covalent bonds take a lot of work. And in the world today, if you've built trust with somebody, the loss of that trust is very significant, but it almost always happens, to me at least, because I don't suffer the presence of normies very well. And I tell them what I think, and they don't like it. And you know how the world is now. If they don't like you, you get excommunicated or
They just turn
woked
you
out
off.
or something.
Yeah, yeah. That's the advantage of the philosophy group. They used to like personal conflicts and stuff, so that nobody takes anything personally, really. I mean, now and again people do, but usually you can talk your way through it. There's a way to talk through it, and we're used to doing that. So if ever when there's a personal conflict, we just figure out a philosophical model that makes sense that matches the conflict.
What sort of philosophical models has your philosophy group come up with recently?
But I'm looking at transcendental ego, which is an old German idealist concept. I think Immanuel Kant came up with it originally, which is it's basically higher self. That's what it comes down to, or in magical terms, it would be the holy guardian angel, maybe something like that. Although that's got more baggage attached to it. But in principle, the transcendental ego is the place that contains the assumptions you have about the world. So it's where temporality is. It's where time and space, your sense of time and space is. Kant came
I
up with
don't
some
believe in
categories.
time and space anymore.
No, I don't. It's perception of time and space. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
No, I don't believe. I don't think time exists either. But there is a sense of time, and that's where that's held is the transcendental ego, or that higher level of perception. So without that, we wouldn't. It's like how the assumptions we have to function in the world are all held there. Well, you can change them, I think. I don't know exactly how. Well, you can change them. Obviously, you can. But you've got to know that they're there first, and you've got to know that they're assumptions, and you've got to know what the assumption. You don't need to necessarily know what the assumptions are. You just need to know how, what they are, and how to change them, or that
Well,
they are, and how to change them.
that's a lot like role playing, where you choose your character and then you play the character and it has to stay within the character that you've chosen. And if you are out of character, that's a faux pas. Whereas even if you're wrong in character, you develop
Yeah,
the argument based on the character and take it through to its logical completion, then step back from the character and learn the perspective that the character brings in by having the misguided opinion. But we're working on such shaky ground anymore that people can read the same thing and come up with different interpretations. And
Yeah, yeah,
based on where really the interpretation of words, the miscommunication in life now is that English uses the same word to mean so many different things, and it's always morphing. And so you tell somebody to chill out, and that used to be a normal term to calm down.
yeah.
But now, if you want to chill somebody out, you got to ice them.
All right, yeah. I'm not going to buy into that. I don't think. No, in the
It's a
groups that
funny
I'm in,
word.
the groups that I'm in, just pick high level concepts that you. It's really just a matter of projecting your psychology onto the concept because the concepts don't have any real meaning on their own. So the way they do it is just pick a random high level concept and talk around it forever, and then everybody's got a slightly different version of it. You start to see people's assumptions about how things work just by the way they talk about a concept, and it's interesting. I don't think it's necessarily it's not a traditional way of doing philosophy, but it's a very interesting way of doing things, and I quite like it. I quite like it, but the problem is they don't tell people that that's what they're doing. They just do it and expect people to join in, and it's like, all right, all these people are projecting onto this concept, and there's two or three people in the group who know what's going on, and everybody else is completely oblivious. They're just projecting, and they think they're talking about the concept, and they're actually talking about themselves.
Be very interesting afterwards for those 3 or 4 people that know what's going on to get together and write a summary of what they found. And so that way, different groups taking the same topics, we could see if the thought converges or diverges, which would
Yeah.
be very important.
The other way that I've started thinking about these groups is a philosophy group is a conversation. This is the conversation we've been having recently is about conversation, and the way I'm thinking about this because I'm looking at Aleister Crowley and Western magic and stuff like that. I'm thinking about the groups as magical rituals. So the equivalent of producing an egregore or producing a stronger concept. So every time we're talking about truth or we're talking about beauty or the good or whatever it is we end up talking about, which is always those three, it reinforces the concept. It reinvigorates the concept. So those three will never ever go away. And then you've got other concepts that are less hungry for conversation. Let's say that don't demand as much attention, but they're still there. You've got justice and those sorts of things, the slightly lower levels virtues and stuff. But if you think about it as a ritual that redefines a concept or a ritual that reinforces a concept, it becomes a magical process rather than just a conversation. And I'm looking at it like that to see where that takes me. I'm not saying it's necessarily real, but it's a way of looking at the groups that I'm finding as it's an interesting way of getting. And plus, Joel came up with this idea of concepts having life and survival mechanisms and all of that, which is the equivalent of an egregore, which is a magical tradition idea. So it makes sense for me to then start looking even more at the magical tradition when he's coming up with stuff like that. I'm coming up with it from a different angle, and it's reinforcing each other. So I don't know where it'll take me, but that's the way I'm kind of looking at them at the moment. And these conversations are the same because they're weekly or more or less weekly. I mean, we miss a week here and there, but it's mostly weekly. It's a ritual. It's a magical ritual reinforcing certain ideas and developing certain ideas.
Do you guys talk about both white and black magic, or is that left unsaid behind the conversation?
No, they don't really like my language. They don't like my magical language. That's just probably me looking at it. They'll use the idea of concepts, but we always look at the positive aspects of the concepts. We never really look at the negative aspects or the limits of them or whatever, because they always assume that it's an unlimited idea.
Okay. Did you ever get to meet my friend Richard Allen Miller? I know when we were doing the radio show, I had him on several different times, and he is a Crowley disciple
Right,
and really knows the art of the black magic, but he's
right.
not a black magician. I
I
believe
just knows
he's
how
a
to do it.
white magician who studies the black in order to know about it,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
his mental state is not all here, as ours isn't either. But
Yeah,
when I get people who know things deeper than I know them from different perspectives, it helps me get a real idea of how things are. But right now, the world is full of people who support the system because it's mandatory, not because you can. It's one of those things where the system is the system and you use it or you don't. And if you don't, it beats you up. And it's set up that you just use it. But when it falls apart and we have to reinvent things like trade, especially trade over distance, because if there's no gasoline or motor skills, we'll still be able to talk on the internet. We just won't be able to drive to the next hamlet and pick up things that we normally would be able to stock ourselves with. But I
yeah,
look at the world for stocking and resupply and things like that, and I think, well, I better plant some teas and get them cultured going because import and export is going to be gone, and getting coffee and tea is going to be virtually impossible. So it's worth stashing that sort of thing. But really, everybody should stash one thing that they value, not necessarily that other people value. Because when it comes down to exchange, it's going to be having things that people need and don't have that will get you the most bang for your buck.
yeah, yeah. The other thing I've been doing, which you already know about, is the metaphysics of money. I'm
Mm-hmm.
interested in that as well. So I did have an idea last year, early about this time last year. I decided I wanted to have a metaphysics of money conference, and I did put it forward in some of the truth groups that I was in, and nobody really picked up on it. So I've kind of developed it a little bit in my Reiki group, and developed it a little bit in other places online in the Discord. But it needed its own server, so I've set up a server which I'll put a link underneath here to see if we can get a few people in. But if you're interested in, well, I know you're interested in the metaphysics of money. I'm interested in the the because it's been money's a tricky thing. There's a whole lot of baggage goes along with it, and there's a whole lot of belief systems go along with it. So it's a way of getting to a healing process, getting to a process of understanding about money gets you to a process of understanding about everything else as well. I think so. I'll just
From a perspective wise view, money is certainly its own perspective. It's a currency, and currency flows. And
yeah,
so, hoarding money doesn't really work because it's the flow of money that makes the system go. But there's so many different aspects of it, and I really feel that the monetary system has grown to the point where it's no longer bounded by Fibonacci as a curve, that it's
Right.
reached the point where it's now bounded by a doubling function, which means anything you put in is what you get out. And so, whereas the whole system is devised on interest to make more out of less, and with Fibonacci as an upper limit, it gives you a lot of room for growth. Uh,
Right. Yeah.
but it controls things. Whereas with the doubling function, at low numbers, it's higher than Fibonacci, and so it's not a limit. But somewhere around 3 or 4 trillion, those two lines cross.
Right.
And the doubling function becomes lower than Fibonacci, and the doubling function is just linear. For people who are wonder what we're talking about, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, etc., is what
Yeah.
the doubling function is. Whereas Fibonacci, you just take two numbers and add them. So 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and then 8, 13 is 21, and so forth. But the group theory that I've been working on, taking scientific mechanisms, math mechanisms, and applying them in places to human psychology and human sociology, is leading me to the understanding that we work better in small groups than in large groups, and
Yeah. Yeah.
developing ideas is better when you're talking with 2 or 3 or 5 people. When you've got 15 people in a room, everybody can't talk and everybody has their own idea. That's a different level of conversation. But in essence, humans have to be represented at every function of scale by real humans. And that becomes tough because by the time you get to, say, community scale, there's a lot of people who have responsibility for getting things done for the whole community that individuals within the community should appreciate, but some don't. And having it be where people are on an equivalent or equal basis just can't happen in a monetary system. Everybody's chasing money, and some people have more and some people have less. But if you don't chase the money, you can just manifest what you need. And people don't understand that, and they live in fear that their money is going away. But as we said earlier, money's just currency, and it's the flow of money that matters, not the money itself.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's somebody said on. I was watching some American podcast the other day, and they were talking about the death of the Pope, and apparently 80% of the money on the planet flows through the Vatican Bank.
Yeah, the Vatican has been around for so long that it has its tabs on everything, and everything has been compromised to the Vatican. I'd love to see what's in their library. What about the idea
Yeah.
of books as currency?
Books as currency, or we could just go back to using shells if we have to. You can use anything as long as it's an agreed form of value. You can use absolutely anything. You could use salt. People used to use salt or spices. We
Yep.
could do that again, or teas. If you're growing tea, we could use tea.
Yeah, as long as there was an agreed upon medium of exchange, it doesn't matter what is being exchanged, but books might have secondary value in the knowledge within the book. I wonder now, though, if a lot of the books that have been printed, we should maybe question the knowledge that went into the premise of the books, because
Yeah,
a lot of them were working from a basis that we're no longer on. And I see the world today as more people asking an AI a question and taking that as an answer rather than looking something up in a book, with the intermediate being looking something up on the internet. But Google sure did a job on us when it said it was going to preserve every book in a way that people can access them. And then so many good books are out of print and you can't find them, and you do the search on Google and you still don't find them, even though you know what you're looking for and you know the book is in print.
yeah, yeah. It's tricky. But getting back to this conversation as magical ritual idea.
Oh, okay.
The Catholic Church is a huge ritual machine, isn't it?
It
Ultimately, it's
certainly is. All churches are, in a way. The Catholic Church, though, I don't know. They used the Crusades to kind of wipe out any opposition. And then, I don't know. There's so much involved in what's going on. And then you step back and you look at the Masons, and they're almost parallel to the Catholic Church.
yeah.
But do the Masons control the church, or do the church control the Masons? Or are the church and the Masons one and the same people, just wearing different hats to be able to speak with different tongues?
There used to be that certainly the Theosophical Society and all of those people were all Freemasons. The Golden Dawn was all Freemasons, and yeah, the head of the Freemasons is the king, who's the head of the Church of England. So and it's very churchy. I nearly joined a Freemason group at one point about 20 years ago. I was looking at it. So I used to go to their open public conferences. There's a Freemasons like a meeting centre where I used to live in London, not too far away, about a mile away. So I walked down there a few times on a Wednesday evening for their open public meetings, and yeah, and I got talking to a woman who was running a group of Masons that was originally from France, which was a men and women in the same lodge, whereas normally it's just men in one lodge and women in another lodge. But she had a mixed lodge. So I looked at that. I went to a naming ceremony for a baby. He invited me in on a Sunday afternoon to meet people and see what was going on. And it was too formal for me, and it was too churchy for me. It was very much like somebody playing the organ in the corner and somebody reading a lesson from a book and all of that. It was very churchy, very very churchy.
That's ritual in the form that it is these days. And ritual is really important in magic.
Yeah,
Getting to the point where you repeat the same phrases in the same way with the same intent gives sort of like a boost to what you're trying to value there. Uh, I was a member of the Grange for a while. Grange is a farmer support operation, and it also was
right.
very much churchy and based on ritual. And I think that that's just the organizational structure that people of the elders of today, people over 50, were brought up in.
Yeah.
Younger people than that don't don't see what we got to see as we were growing up because they quickly replaced those things. I grew up in the 60s. I think you grew up in the 70s. But
Yeah,
by
pretty
the
much.
80s, things had transformed, and now the people in power were taking full advantage of that power. And now, 45 years after the start of the 80s, we've got a conditional crisis in humanity. And I'm not sure that all of us are all here conceptually because the concept of timelines leads me to believe that the outcome of a timeline is what's important. And ontologically, they would like us to just submit and let them run things, but that's not the way it happens.
No, I mean I'm old enough to remember vaguely. I grew up Catholic, so I used to go to mass every week. I can vaguely remember the Latin mass before they changed it even into English, and the layout of the altar changed so that originally the priest always had his back to the congregation, and they changed it around so that the altar was facing the congregation, and they changed the language. But if you want something that's obviously a ritual, that's obviously a magical ritual, then you've just got to look at the Latin Mass. It's very clearly a big magical ritual. There's no there's any doubt about that.
And that goes directly back to the Rome and the concept of the Pope and the whole operation of the society. But
Yeah,
there's there's really a battle going on between religionists and secular humanists. And I think the secular humanists have come into this transcendentalism, and the church doesn't buy into that. They use it, they call it something different, but they're not willing to vest themselves publicly in the idea of magical power.
no, most people don't do that, but it's an interesting way to look at the world. I mean, I see a whole lot of people online talking about demons and angels and all of that, and I'm not necessarily buying into that. But if you think about it, anger is a demon, uh, resentment is a demon, frustration is a demon, because it possesses you. It takes over your life if you don't sort it out. So you can think of it in terms like that. It doesn't need to be personified. But then anything that you've got a ritual involved in a regular situation becomes potentially something that's alive and has a survival mechanism and is living on its own and looking for other people to feed it. So if you look at the world like that, then that means that like anything that's a hobby potentially can possess you. Anything that's anything you do regularly can possess you ultimately.
Well, that's just another way of saying that you're focused on something to the exclusion of other things. And at
Yeah, yeah.
times you really should be. If you're learning something that you need focus and concentration to understand, then you do have to be excluding the outside world and thinking in a mindset that develops the concept to a point where now you can take what you've learned and apply it and use it. But it you hardly ever apply what you learn in school immediately. So much of what they taught me, at least, it was, well, you got to learn this. Why? What use does it have? Oh, you'll find out later. There'll be a time when you need to use it. And I bought the argument hook, line, and sinker and dove deeply into mathematics. And sometimes there are some very obscure mathematics that I can use because I know they're out there and I spent time in the study looking for. But I don't think that's how most individuals treat their learning experience. And once you have a job where you have to apply focused learning, the job takes over and teaches you what you need to do. And you
Yeah,
find that the learning that you did was more establishing concept for your own consciousness rather than specific information. You learn specific information, but you know where to look it up if you need it. And I've got several texts that tell me how different sciences work based on the New York Times publication of what they thought science was at the time that it was published. And I think mine was written in the 1980s. Now, 50 years later, it's most of this stuff isn't right. But it was, it gives me a basis set for understanding how consciousness and life has evolved.
yeah, it's a reference point, if nothing else. It's a way of a shared reference point, so that you can talk about it with other people. Books are always useful for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I find that now as I'm an old guy, the books that I had access to when I was younger and didn't value as much because I didn't have the understanding of what was contained in those books. But I probably have less than 5% of all the books I've owned in my lifetime that I still have. And any book that I walk away from that I really find valuable, I usually acquire again. So some
Yeah,
books I've had three, four, five different copies of. Uh, the book I'm missing right now is the little yellow book on the I Ching. That for years I rolled coins and read the I Ching and interpreted the messages and used that as my form of divination
right.
and
Yeah,
got it to understanding where I was coming from, that then it became part of my basis set and I no longer had to, or I felt I no longer had to roll coins. And so the book got on a shelf, and I've walked away from so many shelved books. Uh, Lately, I've been rereading books that I have previously explored in order to understand the concepts behind the concepts of what's
yeah,
going on. And so I spent this winter with Tom Clancy,
right.
100 Red October and all that series. And then when I finished that, I was looking out around for something else. I devoured a bunch of Kyle Mills, who writes about government assassins.
Right.
And after I finished understanding about government assassins, now I'm reading Webb Griffin, who again brings that together in other aspects. But I want to understand the psychology of the military industrial system to be able to have a system that serves the function without such things, because we definitely don't need war. And war is a way of culling the population and creating
Yeah,
profits for the Vatican and their series of bankers, lawyers, doctors, and Indian chiefs that they run through the Vatican. And I wonder when it comes out the influence of the Catholic Church, if we don't find that all of the monotheists are derivatives of the Catholic Church that took off in ways like the Baptists took off from the Catholics. And
Right. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
forks in the road at different times in history, but history is always written by the victors and repeated. And I'm of the opinion that well written fiction informs you of how things work better than the school system that teaches you what things are but isn't focused on how things work. What they're focused on is getting you to behave yourself and be a productive citizen and not think, just concede your authority to them.
Yeah. There's a lot to be said about the education system that needs a lot of work. But yeah, and the Vatican's got its claws in all sorts of things that I didn't even realize it was in. So there's like weapons manufacturing and all sorts of things. So when you think about pharmaceuticals, when you think about it, the last poll recommended people take the vaccine. So that's recommending to 2 billion people or 3 billion people, however many it is, that they take the vaccine. But the Catholic Church has invested in pharmaceuticals, so they're going to make a profit from it. So then you take that into account. It's not a decision without a bias, is it?
No, and that's assuming that vaccines are on the level.
Well,
And
yeah, I'm
I'm
not
not,
assuming.
yeah, I, I believe that what we are watching now is a renovation of how collective human intelligence can reform itself into another entity. I think that we have so many different individual perspectives that every side of every argument is represented by somebody somewhere.
Yeah,
And argument is not bad. We grew up, they were still teaching how to debate. Now, what you get for debates are people raising their voices at each other, and whoever shouts louder wins. It really doesn't work.
no, talking over each other is not really. It's not a conversation. It's not a debate. It's not anything really. But that's the way the media works, generally speaking. So Lenny, we're coming up to 55 minutes. Do you want me to put a link to the new way in with the video this week?
You can do that. I'm not pleased with the interface of the website, but it has a lot of the background for what I'm thinking. And my daily blog is usually anywhere from 6 to 15 sentences, maybe 3, 4 times a week, that gets to the merit of issues. So it opens up to the blog page, but if you find the other pages, there's more interesting stuff that's worth discussing. But what I'm using the blog for is to put things out so that they're there, so that later on, when the whole current mess is done, people can have an idea of the perspective of individuals and where they stood with respect to the organizations that we belong to at all different levels of the scale. Because each of us is an individual, but all of us together, all humanity, is broken down into things like countries or businesses or states or
Yeah,
communities. And each one of those groupings are different amounts of people trying to interface at a level where the problems change and the scope and the scale aren't necessarily consistent with each other. So I'm working out mathematics of scale so that we can make sure that at larger scale groups, the human considerations are still matter and have effect, because right now what they're doing at all scales is empowering people who seek power. And short run, it might work. Long run, we get messes that aren't cleaned up. And the question is human values the most important thing? Or once you die, they go away, you're not interested anymore and you go to something else? I guess the afterlife is a concept that many people believe in, but my concept of time now is that time is in the eternal now, and we'll never make it to an afterlife because no matter what it is, we're in the consciousness we're in until it changes.
Yeah,
But I haven't had my consciousness change on me instantly yet. It might, and I might not recognize it, because once your consciousness changes, your memory changes. And I've seen people who I thought I knew, but there's walk ins, people were spiritually in that body, were replaced by some other spirit to perform a task or do a job or that.
right.
And so I don't know. I've lost a weekend of time before where I have absolutely no memory of what happened that weekend, but I know that when I regained my memory, everything was intact up to Friday evening. And then the next thing I knew, it was Sunday noon.
Right. Yeah, it's an odd thing. But you're starting to go a bit.
Yeah, there's always some,
Yeah,
go
your
ahead.
videos, your videos collapsing a little bit, Lenny. So I think we'll probably wrap it up at this point. I'll put a link to the new way in the description. What about the Discord? Do you want me to put the Discord in there as well?
No, my Discord, put in the Metaphysics of Money Discord.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Sending people to the new way isn't quite there because the new way is set up for the old radio show.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm using it because I don't have a Discord set up for the new way currently, and it seems to flow. But most of the stuff going on, except at the patio,
Right.
is
Yeah.
archived. It's not really current. And so the patio is only the social space where I post what I've been reading to develop my world opinion. People like Kunstler, Fulford, uh, Cliff High. Just if people are out there on the edge of talking about different realities, I want to know what's out there on the edges. The muddle in the middle is going to crash it all together, but the options don't come from the middle, they come from the edge.
Yeah, I agree with that. The fringes is where all the important stuff is. It's where all the interesting stuff is. It's where all the stuff that all the new stuff comes from the fringe. You won't find anything coming from the mainstream that's in any way interesting in my world. Anyway, I'm gonna wrap up at that point, Lenny. But we'll speak again next week. Uh,
All
thanks
right.
thanks for your time, man. Have a good week.
Be well. Thank you.
Cheers, man.